There's a new generation in town, that's right. And Gen Z is now followed by Generation Alpha. Today's guest, Mike Fisher, has been studying Gen Alpha and wants to talk about how they are different and what we need to know about teaching this generation of students. No, change never stops, and great teachers always work to be relevant to the kids in their classroom. This is episode 743, Understanding Generation Alpha. Thank you, Advancement Courses, for sponsoring today's show. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn about 21 hot topics for summer 2021 and for how you can save 20% on your professional development this summer.
Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis.
Today, we're talking with Mike Fisher. He's an author, instructional coach from up in Buffalo, New York, and he's written a lot of interesting books, including Hacking Instructional Design. But today, Mike, you and I have talked about that we are going to discuss Generation Alpha. How do we understand and teach Generation Alpha? Now, how do you define Generation Alpha?
Well, the simplest way is just to do it by years. Generation Z was 1995 to 2010, or 2009, I guess. And Generation Alpha is that generation of kids that were born starting in 2010. And usually there's other nuances to generations, like boomers had, wars. This Generation Z had 9/11. And, Generation Alpha is going to have this pandemic that we're all in that's going to be a unifying force for them. Usually there's something big that happened in the world that unifies those generations beyond just the dates, even though they're not arbitrary, but it's usually more about the thing that brings them all together rather than just the dates.
So what are some of the characteristics of Generation Alpha? Because you're kind of passionate about understanding this generation.
I think that I want to appear to be passionate because I want that passion to rub off on others, especially teachers who have these students coming into their classrooms, because teaching these students is going to be different than previous students that they've taught. It's not going to be the same sort of mindset. These kids are coming in. They were born with devices in their hands. They have an expectation to work online and offline with a variety of modalities and a variety of different types of media. And that's going to have some implications into how we plan for these learners and the way that they demonstrate their learning. I've got one living in my house, an 8-year-old, who is constantly in this creative mode. I look at her friends that are in school and other kids that I see as I'm out in schools, and they all have this same sort of creative energy, but it's a very on-demand energy, and it has to be dealt with immediately. They're not very good at idle time.
No, they're not. They're always scrolling or liking or sharing, or there's something, isn't it?
It really is. And all of that liking and sharing I think it's changing their brains. They're seeking lots of positive reinforcement for their environment, but it's very thin. It's very surface level reinforcement where they're doing things for likes, or they're doing things for that surface level appeasement. And there's not a whole lot of depth to that. And so the teacher still is really important to help bring some of that depth back into the instruction where kids are used to getting, immediate positive feedback. And what does it look like when we go deeper? And how are teachers going to plan for that?
So if they sort of live their lives just on their own without the encouragement and direction, you're looking at 2 miles wide and 1 inch deep.
Exactly.
Rather than an inch wide and 2 miles deep. There's the depth.
Exactly.
So how do we as teachers help them with depth?
Well, there are several things that teachers need to consider when teaching Generation Alpha. And one of them is that immediacy and positive reinforcement has to be deeper than just, I like that, or just open praise that doesn't have anything actionable behind it. So I'm really happy to see, especially with the pandemic, a lot of social and emotional learning and a lot of social and emotional angles on things, because that's where we start to dig in and help kids see that their self-worth is beyond just a like or a star or the love button on Twitter. We want them to see that, the things that they're doing and the things that they're exploring and their identities as learners are not dependent upon that like button. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And I think that's going to be, especially with the pandemic and what is coming after this, when kids do go back to school, that social emotional component is going to be important for all kids, but specifically for Generation Alpha. Mm-hmm. Another thing is because they've grown up with devices, they're not going to be good at school the way that former generations have been good at school. And what I mean by that is just the sort of behind the scenes, unwritten ways that we interact at school. You come in, you sit down, you do your work, you leave. We have parent-teacher conferences. Everything is the way it was in 1987. It's not that way anymore. Students are going to expect to work in groups, in pairs. And when they do work alone, they'll still be seeking feedback from, the room or the school or the world. And I think that's one thing that teachers really need to plan for, where that feedback comes from and the quality of that feedback, so that, again, it's not just blanket praise with nothing underneath it. And then the biggest thing that Generation Alpha is going to need is products of value. They're going to want to do work that benefits them, that they can be proud of. They're not going to want to take your test on Friday just because it's Friday. They're not going to want to learn a whole bunch of vocabulary words just because those are the words of the week. Things are going to have to be contextual, and they're going to have to create things, build things, iterate, prototype. Those are going to be very important for this generation of learners.
I think you're using some words that kind of, in some ways, upset the apple cart. And I think it's important for us to understand that a different generation is that they're just different. And we do have to understand their reality. You said students expect to and students want to. Now, I graduated in 1987, so I can speak to that time period. It didn't matter what I said about what I expected or wanted from school. School was my job. I had to be at school. And, authoritarianism, it was there, but, it's still somewhat here now. They're just some adults that there's a balance. I mean, kids do need to know how to do the work, how to get the things done. But then what do you say to teachers who are just kind of like, really, you're going to let kids say what they want?
Absolutely. And I can help you with that. I can help coach you through it. With my colleagues, Allison Zamuda and Marie Alcott, we wrote a book several years ago called The Quest for Learning. And in that book, we address what we call student-facing curriculum elements, where the students are actually contributing. It's a component, an important component of personalized learning. And I don't want to throw out like all the educational buzzwords just because we're having a conversation, but they are all interconnected and they are all important for this generation of students. And when we personalize the experience and when we invite that voice and choice into the minutia of school, it changes the game and it changes the level of buy-in and it changes the level of, it makes it so that school is not a compliant thing, it's a compelling thing. And we want school to be a compelling thing for kids. We want them to be absolutely ravenous learners, voracious readers, and incredible mathematicians and deep thinking scientists, arguing from evidence as historians. I think that this, products of value, personalizing the learning, student-facing curricular elements, those are all ways to solidify the identity that a kid has as a learner. And, I think even beyond just Generation Alpha, the way that kids learn and work in school, I'm hugely passionate about, because I want them to have that say. I want them to have the voice, and I want the teachers to be open to that. Maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time.
Well, you and I exactly speak the same language. I want students to understand that they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. And yes, sometimes we have to work on our weaknesses and that builds tenacity, but sometimes we work on our strengths and that really actually builds our future. Kids need opportunities to learn from so many different sources, but that voice and that choice and all of these things just bring that passion to the classroom. So what you're saying is these things we've been talking about for Gen Z are even more important for Gen Alpha.
Absolutely. We want them to run with their learning, not just have learning applied to them. And I'm going to say something that might horrify you. It might horrify your listeners. And if any of my children's teachers are listening, it might horrify them too. But my children don't care about your grades. I don't care about the grades. What I care about is that the learning is occurring. And I care about the depth of the learning. I care about how much is foundational that they're going to need from now on. I care very deeply about how things are tracking across their learning and how it's integrated in their programs. And I want my kids to understand that. We have many conversations here about, I made a bad grade on the test. Well, tell me more about what you know. Because usually what I draw out of them, they've demonstrated that they've learned it, but they didn't demonstrate it for the teacher in the way that it was being assessed. but it doesn't mean that it was all for naught. And not that I'm expecting teachers to say, oh, well, Mike Fisher said we shouldn't have grades, and so let's go gradeless. I'm not saying that. I do think that there should be a level of accountability, but I don't think grades is it. I think how we give kids feedback and how we help them shape their learning into something that's worth demonstrating so that they have things that they're proud of. And that they have that level of pride in their work to increase the quality of their work. And they're sharing it with the classroom, the school, the community, the world, whoever can give them feedback, inviting experts from the field, having conversations with people in their community. I think all of these things are necessary. We're solving a lot of problems here in 8 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, you have to relate to educate, as I often say. And I look back not too long ago, I was going through some, older memories, and I kept my 5th grade report card. And I looked at that report card. I'm like, why of all the ones? And I had looked at the inside, and I'm trying to rack my brain. And like one class I had a 92 and one class I had a 98. I was a pretty good student. And I was looking at that, trying to remember. I couldn't remember anything about the courses. I mean, I know I learned English. I know I learned spelling. I know I learned the content. But I felt no difference between a 92 average and 100. But I flipped over that report card, and that teacher had written thoughtful, meaningful things about how she saw that I was as a person. That's why I kept that report card. It was because that teacher took the time to write something meaningful that she had noticed about me. And that meant more now, all these years later, than the grade. And I do think that grades are helpful. It's keeping score, which in some ways is necessary in life. However, even more important, I think, than the grade that my student earns, and they do earn grades, is what are the things I notice and what are the comments I write on those report cards, because they are each unique. And I just don't think industrial age manufacturing is going to work with these generations. I
agree. And I think that for anybody listening to this and your mouth is open hearing us talking about this, it's really an important topic for the 21st century about grading and feedback and standards and quality. But the most important part of that report card is the written comment. That's the subjective part. It's easy to tally up the grade and stick that on there. And I agree with you. I can't think of a time in school where I can think of why I got the grade I got, or just, a lot of times it was because I didn't turn something in. But what was more meaningful for me was discussions and feedback and what was written on the back of that report card. And what if the report card was nothing but that? How powerful could that be?
Yeah.
Because kids need that. And it doesn't need to be, just something that's for their parents. It needs to be an ongoing thing in the classroom. So the kids are getting ongoing formative feedback as they progress towards their goals.
And whatever you think about the grade part, I think we all agree that when I, as a parent, look and see that a teacher knows my child well enough to write something that I know is about my child and not from a comment bank, it means a lot to me as a parent. And it also means a lot to my child. It gives me positive things to talk to my child about rather than the grade. Because what parents do, they look at that and, if you've got 198, 95 and you have a 92, what is the first thing the parent says? Why'd you make the 92, right? So they're always, well, good job making 100. It's why did you make the 92? So Mike Fisher, author and instructional coach, we will link to some of his books in the show notes. You've given us some really thought-provoking things to consider about Generation Alpha. Thanks for starting this conversation.
Thank you.
Recently, I shared 21 hot topics for teacher professional development for summer 2021 on my blog. We all need to rest this summer so that we can definitely be our best this fall. But if you have accreditation or school learning requirements like I do, then you'll also take some time for summer professional development. Head over to coolcatteacher.com/21 for 21 hot topics that everybody's talking about right now, and look at some options for summer professional development that you can do anywhere. And while you're there, remember, if you sign up for a course, use the offer code COOL20. That's COOL20 to receive 20% off your summer professional development with advancement courses. So go to coolcatteacher.com/21 and remember to use the code COOL20 when you purchase a course at advancement courses. It's time to plan your summer professional development. So I hope you'll join me in taking your course with advancement courses this summer.
If you enjoyed today's 10-Minute Teacher podcast, why not subscribe on iTunes? You can also catch up with Vicki on Twitter at CoolCatTeacher or level up and learn with her blogs and free resources at CoolCatTeacher.com. Thanks for listening.